According to Denya, Senior Executive Vice President of Afreximbank, in order to power up the digital revolution and evolution of Africa's economy, development must go beyond electricity supply. Denya spoke to Arise business correspondent Rotus Oddiri at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Let's have a look.
All right, Arise News here at the World Economic Forum 2025 here in Davos, Switzerland. And we're speaking, of course, with Mr. Denya, who is the Senior Executive Vice President at the Afreximbank. Thank you so much for speaking to Arise News, sir. My first question to you, for people who are not aware of the primary role of African multinational financial institutions, how would you explain it in the simplest terms?
No, good morning, and thank you very much for having me this morning. African governments recognize the challenges that the continent faces in terms of its growth trajectory. So they set up a number of financial institutions to tackle various aspects of these challenges. They set up institutions to focus on provision of infrastructure to enable economic development to take place. So you have the likes of the Trade and Investment Bank, the African Development Bank, that focuses so largely on the infrastructure. They set up African Export-Import Bank to tackle the lack of development through trade, promoting, financing, and enabling trade to take place amongst African countries and between Africa and the continent and the global world. So financial institutions that are owned by the sovereigns are given certain privileges and immunities that enable them to tackle the difficult challenges that open up the opportunities for Africans to prosper. So they are very, very important because they bridge the gap between the governments and the private sector, enabling Africa to tackle its economic challenges.
Thank you. Now, you've had a lot of engagements. The Afreximbank has a lot of engagements this week here in Davos. How are you putting Africa's agenda front and center with all the interactions that you're having here?
Davos offers us an opportunity to engage with the wider business community, largely the policymakers and the executive makers in the world. So the role of the bank is to promote Africa's development through trade, enabling the continent to trade more amongst itself, which is intra-Africa trade. So we have to bring that agenda to the table. Because in order for Africa to trade more amongst itself, it needs to go beyond trade in commodities and raw materials. To do that, you need to transform those raw materials into semi-processed and finished goods. To do that, you need infrastructure like energy, like plant and equipment, and that requires trading with non-Africans who actually have the technology and the equipment to enable you to do that. So that's why we are here, to engage with the world in order to promote intra-Africa trade and Africa's development.
Technology has a big role to play there. That is actually the theme of Davos this year, collaborating in the intelligent age. There have been a lot of panels on technology. One that stood out to me was titled Powering Africa's Digital Economic Revolution. What does that mean to you? Is it basically providing electricity to make sure the digital revolution happens for Africa?
No, it goes beyond provision of power. Electric power is required in order to power computing. If you have to build data centers, you need energy. So that's one part of it. But technology enables institutions such as Afreximbank to service its customers better. We are a continental institutions covering 55 countries on the continent. And in order to do that, we need technology. If you look at some of the challenges that bedevil the continent, is lack of financial infrastructure, payments infrastructure. That's why as African Export-Import Bank, we developed the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System in collaboration with the AfCFTA Secretariat and the AU to make it easier for Africans to trade amongst themselves using local currency and ensure finality in terms of settlement. But we're not only talking about payments. We have a program called the Africa Trade Gateway, which also helps Africans in terms of KYC, the Manza platform that we have. But one of the impediments to trade is also lack of information. We have a product called Trade Information Portal that allows Africans to know what is produced in other countries so that they can source that. But in addition to that, we also have put in place a platform called the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, which runs every 2 years, where Africans can showcase what it is they produce. And it runs virtually and physically as well.
Thank you so much. Now, on the matter of trade, you talked about the lack of information. On the infrastructure side, boosting intra-Africa trade, is it about ports? If we get more ports, can we boost trade, or does it go beyond that?
It absolutely goes beyond that. Infrastructure is an impediment. And I'm talking not only about the hard infrastructure, the lack of ports capacity, the lack of adequate roads, rail, but the soft infrastructure as well that is not in place. You need enabling infrastructure to be there in terms of policies and procedures. You need financial infrastructure to be there in terms of payments and settlement, foreign currency availability. So all these are required in order to power trade on the continent, especially intra-Africa trade. Ports is just one element of it.
My final question for you, sir. As far as your outlook for 2025, from the viewpoint of the Afreximbank, how are you seeing things working out for the continent this year?
We are always extremely optimistic about the prospects of Africa. And for reasons that have been enumerated, the youth dividend, the resource availability on the continent, I think what really excites us is that African governments are seeing the potential of Africa through collaboration. So if you look at the regional projects that are taking place, we're talking about the Lobito corridor covering DRC and Zambia, but there are already discussions afoot to include other countries in that corridor. But that's not the only corridor we are talking about. We are talking about the Lagos-Abuja corridor. We are talking about the North-South corridor, Ethiopia-Sudan corridor. And these are really transformational projects that we are working on. We're talking about railways that connect countries on the continent. So I'm optimistic. I think the growth in 2025 will probably exceed the 4% that we've had. We are excited about the opportunity to trade more amongst ourselves, but also to trade with the regions. Recently, we have opened up markets in China, in Asia, in the Middle East.
Mr. Denya, Senior Executive Vice President at the Afreximbank, thank you so much for talking to Arise News here in Davos.
Thank you for having me.